Hi there, my name is Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Remembering Love. If you're new to this channel, it's a channel where I explore childhood trauma, healing childhood trauma, love, life, and all the various things in between. So welcome. If you're not new, thank you for coming back. Now today, we're going to be exploring the subject of innocence. You know, how we lose our innocence, particularly within a traumatic childhood environment, and how we can regain that innocence, and what is it to feel innocence or to experience innocence, and the value of regaining our connection with our own innocence in this healing process of childhood trauma. So when we think of the subject of innocence, it's not really something that I definitely would kind of think about on a regular basis or even consider. In terms of understanding what innocence is, there's a basic understanding that we think of childhood, or we think of animals, or we think of nature, but particularly I think childhood. You know, we feel like, well, we have this innocence in our childhood, this sense of trust, this sense of openness, this sense of unknowing. You know, we have this kind of like wide-eyed innocence where we're just open, where we haven't been corrupted, we haven't become kind of impure, we haven't been defiled, we haven't kind of become cynical. You know, we believe pretty much what we're told. My kids are now 13 and 14, and I remember, during all their early childhood, up until about the age of 8, they would pretty much believe more or less whatever you told them. Because if you realize, my kids believe in, this magical being comes down a chimney or through the sliding door and delivers presents, this magical rabbit brings eggs, this magical fairy brings money. And if you can believe that, you really think it's true and you're emotionally invested in it, well, you can believe anything. So I used to have a lot of fun with my kids, telling them that I had a dragon, that I had a magical car, all sorts of things, because I realized, they'll pretty much believe whatever I tell them. So I had a lot of fun with it. And then I remember them kind of coming out of that, where they got to a kind of an age where they would start questioning, these things don't kind of seem to kind of make sense, and certain things aren't adding up. And you can see, 7, 8, 9, their brain starts working in a different way where they can rationally analyze things. And by the time they're 10, they just don't believe in these things anymore. They're about 11, 12, not at all. And then 13, 14, they're now more cynical about things. So you see the evolution of that gradual, slow loss of innocence when it comes to these type of things, make-believe. But at the same time, at their age, they still are innocent. They still haven't experienced trauma or violence, or they still haven't kind of experienced the harshness of life. And obviously, as a parent, I would like to maintain that innocence in them for as long as I can, to the extent that's humanly possible. I try not to expose them to violence on the TV. I try to kind of, on one level, protect that innocence and keep that little light of innocence to the extent that I can. I would like to feel, as they get older, they can stay connected to that innocence. But I'm also aware that they'll experience this world, they'll go out in the world, and they'll be hurt. They'll believe in someone and be taken advantage of, and that feeling of trust, that you can just kind of trust whoever and everyone's good, and in this world we live in, that gets taken away pretty quickly. Whether you get ripped off with money, whether you get hurt in love or betrayed. And not only that, but we can do that too. We lose our own innocence. We maybe get greedy, or we choose a selfish direction and let down a friend. So our own sense of innocence, it isn't just that we get hurt by corrupt people. We have our own internal corruption when we compromise ourselves and when we become a bit selfish, and gradually we get to our adulthood, and that it can feel like a bulk of that innocence is lost. Now, losing your innocence in childhood trauma is a different experience. I would like to think my kids have lost their innocence in a very gradual, healthy way, and if possible, I could like to keep them connected with that deep trust and openness that is still there in them as much as they can, and ideally throughout their life. But if you've experienced childhood trauma, often that loss of innocence is very abrupt. It can be very violent. It can be very sudden. It can be in one single event, one traumatic event, or it can be in a series of events where that innocence gradually just gets totally removed and you're totally cut off from it. And the world instantly becomes a very untrustworthy, scary place. And what can happen is that wound and that loss of innocence can have a far greater impact on our view of the world and our view of life and our view of humanity and ourselves than at times we're aware of. And part of the healing process of childhood trauma is working on the understanding that there are things we lose in our trauma to some degree that we have to regain, that we have to kind of take back. And there is this process of handing back, which is things which aren't ours, that if we've carried shame from an abuser who couldn't handle their own shame, because if they could, they wouldn't do the abuse, and we carry that shame on their behalf. And there comes a certain point in our life where we need to kind of hand that shame back, to say this thing I'm carrying is not mine. It doesn't belong to me, and I'm handing it back. And at the same time, as we hand things back that are not ours, running parallel to that, there's this process of claiming back that which we lost. And that can be anger, a righteous anger that we felt we weren't allowed to express. It can be honesty. It can be strength, vitality, a voice, claim back our voice that we felt we couldn't have growing up. It can be to be seen, because maybe we grew up in an environment we felt we had to become invisible. And another thing that I think is very fundamental to claim back is our innocence. And I'm not talking about going back and believing in Santa Claus again. I'm not talking about that type of innocence. I'm talking about the innocence of an open heart, the innocence of a deep abiding trust in life and ultimately ourselves, that there is goodness in us and there is goodness in life, and that we can afford to trust in that. And it's that kind of innocence. There's a famous Swedish mystic, Swedenborg, who was around in the 18th century, and he had understanding that we have two types of innocence. There's the innocence of our childhood, which he called the outer innocence, which he defined as just the normal things you think of childhood innocence. And then he talked about in later life we have to develop what he called an inner innocence, like an adult innocence. And his view that all innocence and all goodness arises from the divine source, that God or divinity, that our innocence isn't ours, it's from this kind of divine wellspring. But you don't need to believe in a divine force to feel that. It's that understanding that there is something pure inside of us, something uncorruptible, something impervious to trauma, that is innocent, that is open, that is honest and is loving and is uncorruptible. And to regain that feeling that we are not these corrupted beings, we are not these defiled beings, we are not these violated beings struggling to kind of get out of things, but to claim that back, to look at the world through innocent eyes, open eyes, trusting eyes, to me is a really fundamental part of that healing process, because it's restoring something that was often violently taken away from us, unfairly taken away from us. And the ability to restore that, to reconnect with that, is, I think, a beautiful thing and a critical thing, a really important thing. But to do that, we have to acknowledge that it's still there in us, that we may have lost connection with it, but we haven't really lost it. It never fundamentally leaves us, but we have to kind of claim it back. We have to be aware of what's in its way. We have to go through this dual process of handing back what is not ours and claiming back that which is. And our innocence is ours. It should have never been taken away from us, but it was. But we can claim it back, and we can learn to look at the world with innocent eyes. And what does that look like? Well, just look at a 3-year-old, or look at a dog, or look at a bird, or look at a tree, that it's all around us. That openness, that uncorruptibility, that bewilderment and beauty and awe that's in all of nature, particularly in children, particularly in the animal kingdom, where dogs aren't suspicious of thinking you have some agenda. And I know for me, that one of the kind of the biggest wounds of my own loss of innocence is a growing kind of cynicism, really, a feeling of, I wouldn't say it's misanthropic, but it kind of borders on that a little bit. Just a cynical view of humanity, of just people, and just not people as scumbags, but there are just a lot of there's a lot of cynicism there, and it's very easy to feel. Look at our political class, our corporate class, look at the world and climate change, and you can really get caught in feeling like, oh, look at us, look how pathetic we are. But it's a harsh way to view the world. It's certainly not an innocent way to look at the world. And I'm not talking about innocence in a naivety or a kind of green stupidity. It's more an innocence of heart, that I am still open to the goodness in myself, the goodness in people, and as cynical as the world is, as corrupt as it definitely appears to be, there is still goodness throughout the world. There is still goodness in humanity, and it reminds me of that, a little bit of that speech Sam gives to Frodo in, I think it's the second Lord of the Rings, about believing in the goodness of others. And I think that to me is the innocence that I'm talking about, that fundamental belief that despite all the corruption, all the trauma, everything we go through, there is a pervading goodness and love that cannot be vanquished or extinguished. And to look at the world with that awareness of that is the reclaiming of our innocence. It's taking back that which was taken from us, that is our birthright. It's fundamental to who we are. So look, I hope this has made sense. I hope this has helped you. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you've got any comments on this subject, please, I'd love to hear in the comments section. And please take care of yourself. Bye-bye.
It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing. This shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come. And when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clearer. Those were the stories that stayed with you. That meant something. Even if you were too small to understand why. But I think, Mr. Frodo, I do understand. I know now. Folk in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going. Because they were holding on to something. What are we holding on to, Sam? That there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.